All right, we're going to move into our main topic for today then. Today's main topic is comparison and cynicism in the creative space. So, how much should we be analyzing other people's work, comparing our work to other people's work? What do we do? Do we compare? Are we cynical? How much do we compare our work with other people's?
Yeah, and how much are we judging other people's work?
Yeah.
And being judgmental about our own in comparison to others?
Krista, for you, I mean, are there a bunch of different illustrators that you follow and, you consume their work, and as you're consuming your work, are you comparing your work to them? Are you being critical of their work? How, for you individually, what's that process like?
Yeah, I think best case, it is taking those things that just are like, I can just feel, like I feel like a punch that has impacted me. And I look at that and then I can say, okay, what is that person doing? Can I analyze those elements of what they're doing? Am I doing those? If I'm not, how can I apply those to my own? And kind of breaking it down like that, giving it piece by piece. And then it kind of makes it less of a jump from, okay, this is what I'm doing, this is what that person's doing, breaking it down, taking those pieces and applying those maybe just a little bit on the next one. And I think that's best case, the healthy way.
Krista, you remind me of the Borg. It is the Borg collective, and everything that you see basically gets assimilated into the network. And you basically, if I see your cube coming, we basically,
resistance is futile.
Full speed, opposite direction, right? Warp 9 or however fast we can go. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is a very insightful comment. I will keep that in mind.
That was a very double-edged comment. It started off feeling like she was doing this really
and
good
then
job.
we have to run away.
But then everyone has to flee her.
It took a turn at
lest
the
they
end.
be consumed.
We're intimidated by her talent, Tom.
Oh, by her talent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it hard in those situations to not compare in a way that makes you feel negative? Because the way that you talked about it seems very healthy. To be honest, as I worked through, it's basically my wrap up. So you just started with my wrap up of the correct answer to this question, which is we compare, we look for the things that are best in it, and we find ways we can learn from it. So what about is there a dark side of that? Do you find yourself comparing in a way that makes you feel negative at all?
Yeah, I think also concurrently, I'm looking for ways to kind of put myself down. So I will see somebody who, I think I ought to be at that level, and I will immediately use that as fodder to beat myself up. But that's kind of, that happens, and I accept that. And then I'm also doing something productive and beneficial that I know is what I want to do. Mm-hmm. So it just kind of balances out, I guess.
Tom, when you're reading content from other people, do you find yourself falling into a similar comparative trap where you're looking for ways to tell yourself you're not good enough? Are you, as elevated as Krista, where you can pretty quickly move through that and just what you can learn from it?
I feel like I identify with comparing myself negatively to things, but that's not really something that I do anymore at this stage in my career. Honestly, less the older I get, the less I even find value in like a really healthy relationship with judging other people's work. There was a point where I felt like, I'm not going to negatively compare myself to these things that other people have made, but there is great value in assessing what they've made and asking myself, how would I have done that differently, and sort of learning something from that, and really thinking in depth about other people's creations. And there were a lot of years where I was really focused on that, and I feel like I did take a lot of things away doing that. But now, at this point, I find myself doing even that less, and I'm just much more interested in what is uniquely me, and how do I refine that, and how do I explore that more sort of holistically and differently. And I honestly, at this point, when I'm taking in what other people do, my focus is on, I'm going to receive this thing that they've made generously and in the light that they meant it. And I don't do much critical eye taking a part of what someone else has made, because the value of that has really been diluted for me over the years. And I'm kind of on to another thing now. And I don't mean that in some like, look at me, I've arrived. And if you're in a place where you do that, something's wrong. But that is kind of where I'm at these days, at least in this season of my life.
I know it wasn't always like that.
No, certainly not. No, there were definitely years where I would read something someone else had written and feel really discouraged that I hadn't written something yet in that vein, or could never do it as good or as well. Or
I've heard you a lot talk about being motivated to pick apart other things, even if it's not in your own creative space, and feeling almost noble about being able to pick apart other people's things. But that's changed a lot for you too.
Yeah, it has. Yeah.
Because you felt like, from my understanding, at that point you felt like you were doing a service to the world when you're trying to have this critical eye towards people's creations.
I think there was, at least for me, a certain point in, I would say, my 20s where I felt like there was almost an artistry to having like a really critical assessment of the things that other people are making, and like, this is the objectively good stuff and the objectively bad stuff, and I am like experienced enough to know the difference, and I am somehow doing some public service by sharing those thoughts with other people so they can see it as, with the intelligence that I am seeing it. And and a lot of that was just a personal flex born out of, I don't know, insecurity or a desire to be something. And that was something that I did a lot when I was younger.
I think about that cynical lens being something that, exactly like you said, is usually a projection of our own internal cynicism as opposed to anything that we really think. And so it's like that filter that you put on. It's, Mark, you talk about this a lot. It's what you bring to anything, right? If you have that cynical lens, then you're going to view your work and everything else you come in contact with in that same cynical nature.
It's very predominant in our culture right now too. And when it's hard to trust what you see in the social space or in the media in general, I think people often, and I see this a lot, people often find it, I don't know, they feel like they have to debunk someone else's opinion or creation. And I don't think that's a noble pursuit. I think it's okay to have differing opinions and ideas and thoughts, and I think there's a big stream of people who believe that too. But the feeling like to pass a very quick, instantaneous judgment about someone else's work without having any of the backstory or the depth that I think would really change your opinion or would help you form a real, truer lens to what the value of that might be for someone, even if it's not you. I think it's something that we should all just slow down a little bit with, on the social platforms, especially, you see people, so reactive, and the amount of time it takes for clickbaity headlines to get clicked with the negative tint that they have, or the negative shade, I should say. Tints are lighter and shades are darker. It's just weird. It's just weird.
She had so much joy on her face with that little bit of knowledge. That was
Am
cute.
I right? Did I get affirmation? I like that. And we're all cynical of things, and I look at that, and just going back to Tom's earlier point, I agree. Like when I see somebody else's work, the first thought is that's what not to do. It's not like I have an appreciation for it, for sure. But in my creative lens, I'm like, well, I'm never going that way. That's a door I'm not going to go through, because my job is to forge, right? It's not to copy.
Okay, so because you want to do something different, not because it's bad.
Right. Exactly. Now, the cynicism does come into play. We don't talk about this a lot, but Tom and I will play games and we'll be like, this is kindergarten, right? And it's really not, right? It's just different. And I think we benefit, or I benefit greatly when I see something, or I see a conversation that is filled with that type of content. There is always something behind that, right? Sometimes there's a good intention behind a cynical view of something. And a lot of times people are trying to be helpful. Like you were saying, Tom, in your 20s or whatever, I did the same thing where we're kind of trying to show an intelligence and a rationale and trying to like be affirmed in some way for a viewpoint that feels educated, has nothing to do with the value of somebody else's opinion or work. And
honestly, our opinions about something that someone else has made are personal and should have very little value to anyone else. And we have spoken before about how much of these things that we share are really just us making a statement to ourselves about ourselves. And there's way too much weight put on what everyone else thinks.
It's so silly because like I could go on about how much I think tomatoes are detrimental for our society and how I hate them. I hate the way they look. I hate the way they taste. I do not like tomatoes. It's the devil's apple, whatever you want to call it.
He says he could go on and on as if
as if we have not all heard him go on and on for years. Yeah.
But it's a different frame because it's not someone's creative work, right? And so people just kind of accept that you don't like tomatoes. Right? Like, it's like, oh, that's fine. That's fine for you. That's your thing. Why can't we do that with people's creative work or people's opinions about things? Right? It's okay. It's okay that Mark doesn't like tomatoes. It's okay that Krista does. Right? But what about that game? What about that movie? What about that book? Oh, well, you know, if you had a little bit more background, you would see things the way that I see a lot of that. And it's just like, no.
One thing I want to challenge all of us with is, okay, so it's important for us to not be critical and not do a whole lot of comparison in a way that makes us feel bad. However, I've seen us all celebrate when we make top 10 lists, you know? So does it go both ways? If we are celebrating when somebody is saying that we are good, it also gives the people who are saying we are bad power.
Interesting.
You know, anytime that we're listening and leaning into someone else's opinion of us, it is giving power to the other side too. So
I don't know if I see it that way. So if you talk about you just ate the best tomato you've ever had, it's just not for me, right? Can it just be like, that's not for me? You know, I've heard people say, I don't like Marvel movies. I don't like Star Wars movies.
But we care. Well, you know? What I'm challenging, I guess, is we said your opinion about somebody else's work really shouldn't matter to anybody. And we think that for sure about people's negative opinions, but we care very much about people's positive opinions of us.
I think we're spinning this conversation away from the question,
okay,
which was, how does our relationship with other people's work correlate with our own relationship with our own work?
Okay.
And is there value in assessing other people's work in the context of feeding our own work? Which I think is a different question. I think what you're pointing out is very accurate as far as what we were talking about, but I feel like we're getting off track a little.
I'm just gonna cap that then, because I like what you're saying there about affirmation. The thing that I think that does is it affirms the human connection. Like something you've done resonates with someone else. I think that does have inherent value. If it doesn't resonate with you, just shut up and go away. Right? Go find the thing that does. There's nothing wrong with that. But back to your point.
So I think as to the question, you know, is there a really healthy, positive relationship that can exist between assessing and absorbing other people's work and having that feed into our own creations?
The first thing that comes to mind with that is when someone asks you for criticism, right? It's not necessarily cynicism, so they're different. But like, for example, if I take a mechanic in a game or something that I'm working on and I show it to Krista and Tom and I'd be like, hey, what do you guys think? And they're like, not feeling it, man. Here's why, and all these different things. That's helpful to me. That lets me see it through their lenses, right? Through their eyes. Having brought a game into the market and then having them play it and talk to their friends about how trash that game is not the same thing. Because number one, you weren't asked in to give constructive criticism to make something better. And I think that is a place where I think we probably need to be a lot more open to people's constructive criticism. Cynicism being different, right? I'm still struggling with that word cynicism. Is there a time when cynicism is helpful? Maybe is a better question.
How about your own criticism, though? Like if you play someone else's game, what role does that have in you making games?
It's very personal. You're right. So like if I play a game, and I've done this a lot, I play a game and I'll be like, this is the last time I'm going to play this game, right? And it's not because other people don't love it. I've played award-winning games that I don't care for, right? I mean, it's just true. It's just not for me. I mean, that's just what it boils down to. It's just not what I enjoy.
Okay, so our opinion on other people's things is a lot more about our own preferences than it necessarily is about our own creations even. Because we can create things that aren't, that are meant for us, but are meant for specific groups of people. You do a lot of research into, what is going to be good for this type of gamer and this type of gamer. And so your opinion on other people's creation has much more to do about your own preferences than it does about how you're going to necessarily create something in the future differently.
Yeah, and taking it out of games, I do think that there are some instances where it's okay to warn other people about something that's out there, right? These people are predatory, or, you should do your research when you're dealing with these folks, or this product is not good. It's got a 1-star rating. Like those things are important too. So it's okay to be critical. And, cynical to me still has a negative connotation. Like inside there's resistance to wanting to be cynical about anything. That says something about me. Being critical is something that I think can be used to help, but it needs to be framed properly. Is that how you guys see it?
Yeah, I guess that kind of internal, like taking note of the internal thing that is fueling the external expression, like for example, in giving criticism to another person, is the criticism, is it something that feels like a gift, that feels like taking a chance on being honest with somebody to help them? And that has a different kind of internal feeling than criticism, which is like a walled off, I don't like that, and it's like a negative feeling, which I think we can then, kind of going back to what you were saying, analyze our own motivations for that. So I think the same act of criticism or comparison, based on what is behind it, can be something very different.
Yeah, I'm still trying to I'm still wrestling with this question as more of a something that has nothing to do with anyone else. It's just your own internal thing. I read a book, is there value for me in not in any public way, just quietly in my head saying, well, this isn't working and this is working really well, and here's what I'm learning from that. And, same with or is that an unhealthy thing because then now I'm, wrapped up in this person's thing instead of doing my own thing? And, that I feel like is more the discussion that the question was trying to elicit.
I find...
Elicit. Is that solicit? No, now I'm lost.
Elicit.
I've broken myself.
I find value in that quiet comparison. Whenever I see... Because since I work so much in social media, whenever I see a piece of content that's a really good piece of content that's gone viral, okay, it's gotten a lot of exposure.
Do you work in social media?
Air quotes.
Do you have annoyances about these things?
But honestly, because I usually really feel an initial flame of jealousy, which is kind of what draws my attention, because it's like, this has something I want. I want content to pick up this much steam. And so there's this initial flame of jealousy that kind of draws me to research further. But I honestly feel like I pretty quickly move out of that jealousy phase into inspiration, especially when the piece of content has it's good, it's gone viral because it's good. That's what really makes me feel jealous, is when something is good and I can pick apart what made it good, and that inspires me to do better work.
And I think sometimes they go viral and I can't determine what made it good, what made it go viral. And I think that's a fun exercise too, is because there is a little wash of cynicism and appreciation at the same time. And I think inherently we've all become very good judges of, for ourselves, the hammer of judgment on what everybody does and what we do. And the openness and the open-mindedness is kind of the elusive thing that I feel like I still chase, because I'm not the most patient person in the world, and I wish I was, because I think when we just slow down and breathe and look a little deeper and just think for an extra 5 seconds about something before we dismiss it, that is more valuable than anything. I think that the practice of doing that will shed a little bit more light on what we're seeing, and it'll help us apply it a little bit better to what we're doing.
Because if I just got jealous and just moved on, then I would just only feel jealous. But when I got jealous and kind of went deeper, that's when it transforms from this negative to something that can actually be useful. Because there's something specific that I was thinking of this last week, and as I studied it and I was so jealous, I'm like, wow, look at the years of intentionality that went before this piece of content. It took intentionality, strategy, dedicated, ongoing discipline that turned into this one piece of content that went viral for a real reason. And so then I don't feel like it's just I haven't done something. It's that depth of intentionality that I need to really work on creating. It's not just one thing I need to do in order to get something to do well. So,
and I think that's brings up a really good point too. It's like that this interaction with this external thing has made you realize something about yourself. Mm-hmm. It's like maybe
that
I'm
shallow.
No,
that I need a little more depth. Yes.
No. I mean, in terms of like that thing that you are seeing, where you get that feeling, whatever, if it's jealousy or whatever that just like feeling is that strikes you, it's some sort of recognition. Mm-hmm. It's like, this is something that I am wanting, that I am, you recognize something within that speaks to you, and maybe you wouldn't have known that had you not encountered that
Which means
external
it's
thing.
Important to compare.
It's fuel that motivates you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The comparison is an interesting word too, because your mom's carrot cake or my mom's carrot cake, mm-hmm. right? Well, maybe you prefer your mom's and I prefer my mom's because that's what we grew up on. How much inherent value is there in that, right? In comparison, it's all subjective, right? But when you're talking about somebody else's work, especially if they have any type of praise or accolades, it becomes you kind of put this distance between your own work and somebody else, and you'd be like, well, my work should be better or should be more like that. And I think that's actually one of the worst things you can do, because what you want to do is make sure your work is more like you, not like someone else, mm-hmm. to Tom's early point.
So if we're agreeing that comparison happens and that there's some value to it, then how much should we analyze other people's work or compare our work to it? What's a healthy amount of this?
When you're learning a trade, I think it's important to study the masters or study people who do it well, so that you can get the fundamentals down, so that you have a frame to build off of. At a certain point, though, I think it's healthy and important to kind of leave the nest and fly on your own, and not necessarily need other people's work to affirm what you're doing by comparison. I think when you look at the truly remarkable, groundbreaking creatives in this world, the ones that we talk about through history, it's not that they did anything like anybody else. It's because they were uniquely valuable. They had a unique lens, and I think the more we chase that, the better off we are. And so I think that's a waning relationship, right, with comparison. But I think it is important in the early stages, especially when you're learning a new craft, right? If I'm going to go build a brick wall in my backyard, I'm going to watch a Google YouTube video of somebody building a brick wall so I can do it properly. But if I decide I'm going to become a mason and then I'm going to start doing really cool stuff on my own, and that's going to be my craft, at some point I'm going to take what I know and do my own thing. That's a terrible example, and I apologize.
We forgive you. Apology accepted. Your point, though, I completely agree with. Like, I would have summarized it the same way, but probably not as elegantly. I think you just did a really good job. But I agree. I think, if you're early in your, career or your engagement with some particular type of creative expression, it is important to look at what other people are doing, learn from it, pull from it, see how it moves you, ask yourself why it moves you, or ask yourself why it's not moving you, and focus on doing that in a healthy, constructive, positive way, not in something that brings you down, but in something that you learn, as something that you learn from. But then, at least from my own experience, I totally agree with Mark that at a certain point, like, that stops having the same amount of value and productivity for you, and you reach a point where you, like, that just becomes spinning your wheels after a while. Like, at a certain point, you just then have to step off and do your thing.
Yeah, I think it's very detrimental to stay too long in a cycle where you're comparing yourself to other people, because it's hard to fight off the desire to become more like what you admire about it, instead of listening to the voice from yourself about where you should go, right? It's a direction thing. So, like, do I want to make something that's kind of like what Tom did, or do I want to really just kind of shut everything else out and do what only I can do? And I think there is a threshold that you can cross at which it is no longer helpful to compare yourself. You have to go out in the dark on your own and risk, and scary as it may be, learn what you're going to learn.
Full on. If you are always thinking about your work in the context of how it relates to other people's work, you exist in the boundary box of that. You know, there's no room outside really of what other people have done for you, for your work. But if you stop thinking about it that way, you can just...
It reminds me of topics we've talked about with the creative process, where there's different steps in the creative process. And it almost feels like if you're trying to compare intentionally in order to improve on this step of your creative process, it's that intentionality, actually viewing it as a step. So that's one type of comparison that can be helpful. Another type, like what Krista talked about, that can be helpful is when you feel something. You know, there's really no way to explain that except pounding your chest. Like when something really resonates with you, comparing to find the piece that you'd like to harness and use, right? So those are two ways that comparison can be helpful if done intentionally and with that purpose. Beautiful?
Beautiful.
Good.
So beautiful.
All right, you are all done talking. I'm done listening to you for the day.
Just you, Tom.
I said you all. That was you too. Sorry.
Right. I didn't realize you were from the South.
What did I say, y'all?
Say y'all.
All right, y'all. This was a great episode. We'll see y'all in the next episode of the Outpost podcast. If you loved us, which of course you did, you're going to leave us a wonderful review. If you're in the small section of people who are comparing your work to ours and thinks yours is so much better, just leave us alone. Like, why are you hanging out here if you don't like us anyway? Go away. If you have ideas that you want to hear us talk about, because I'm sure they're going to be better than what we come up with on our own, you can go to orangenebula.com/topics.
Can all of our outros be this bitter?
And tell us what we should be doing, what we should be talking about instead.
Listen, you think we could do it better? Then tell us what to do.
That's right. But only if you love us and you're doing it out of place of love. Otherwise, just leave us alone. Just
love or shove around here.
Yes.
Wow.
Thank you. See you next time. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.